I stood in the kitchen where I had eaten countless bowls of cereal as a kid, where I had done homework at the worn wooden table where I had shared family dinners for 28 years of my life. But nothing could have prepared me for what my parents were about to say to me on this ordinary Tuesday evening in March. My mother Patricia adjusted her pearl necklace nervously, while my father Harold cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a business presentation. Emma's wedding was exactly 14 days away, and I had just asked if there was anything special they wanted me to do to help make her day perfect. That's when my mother looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything forever. Rudy, honestly, the greatest gift you could give your sister for her wedding is if you would just disappear from our family forever. The silence that followed those words felt like falling into a deep well. I watched my father nod in agreement, his arms crossed over his chest, like he was guarding himself against any response I might give. For a moment, I waited for one of them to laugh, to tell me it was some kind of cruel joke, but their faces remained stone-cold serious. "We've talked about this extensively," my mother continued, her voice taking on that clinical tone she used when discussing her real estate deals. "Emma deserves to start her married life without the constant stress and drama that seems to follow you everywhere. The constant stress and drama." I thought about the last 5 years since I graduated from college with my computer science degree. When Emma failed out of community college after her sophomore year, somehow it became my fault for not tutoring her enough in mathematics, even though I was working 60-hour weeks at my first programming job 3 states away. When our grandmother fell ill with pneumonia last winter, I was labeled selfish for not taking time off work to visit her more often, despite the fact that I drove down every single weekend for 2 months straight. "You remember what happened at Christmas?" my father added, his insurance broker voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Emma was trying to share her exciting news about Brandon's proposal, and you kept steering the conversation toward your work projects." I remembered that Christmas differently. Emma had monopolized 3 straight hours, talking about wedding plans, venue options, and dress shopping, while I sat quietly listening and asking supportive questions. When my cousin David asked about my recent promotion to senior developer, I had mentioned it briefly, before Emma immediately redirected attention back to her engagement ring. "And then there was Emma's photography business," my mother said, counting off grievances on her manicured fingers. "When she needed financial support to get started, you questioned whether it was a sound investment instead of just being a supportive brother. I had questioned it because Emma had already started and abandoned a jewelry-making venture, an online boutique selling vintage clothes, and a dog walking service. Each time my parents had funded her startup costs with money from our joint family account, the same account I had been contributing to since I was 16 years old and working at the local grocery store. "We love you, Rudy," my father said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But Emma's happiness has to come first right now. This is her moment to shine." I looked around the kitchen one more time, taking in the refrigerator covered with Emma's photography prints and achievement certificates from her various short-lived career attempts. There were no pictures of my college graduation, no mention of my scholarship awards, no celebration of the software program I had developed that saved my company over $200,000 last year. Instead of arguing, instead of defending myself, instead of begging them to reconsider, I did something that clearly shocked them. I nodded calmly and said, "Okay." My mother blinked rapidly like she was trying to process what she had just heard. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll disappear from the family." I stood up from the kitchen table and smoothed down my shirt. "But I'll need about an hour to pack my things." The bewildered look that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know. They had expected me to crumble to apologize, to promise to be better. They had expected me to beg for their acceptance like I always had before. I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom, the same room I had been staying in for the past 6 months while I saved money for a down payment on my own place. Methodically, I began folding my clothes into 2 large suitcases. I packed my laptop, my important documents, my college diplomas, and the few personal items that actually belonged to me. My parents stood in the doorway, watching their confidence slowly draining from their faces as they realized I wasn't putting up a fight. "Rudy, maybe we should talk about this more," my mother said, her voice losing some of its earlier conviction. I carefully wrapped my grandfather's pocket watch in a soft cloth and placed it in my suitcase. Grandpa Joe had left it to me specifically in his will, along with some other items that I was beginning to remember more clearly. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied without looking at them. "You've made your wishes very clear." I carried my suitcases downstairs and loaded them into my Honda Civic. 20 minutes later, I returned to collect my desktop computer, my books, and a few family photos that included me. My parents followed me around like confused children, clearly unprepared for this reaction. As I loaded the last box into my car, my father finally spoke up. "Son, where are you going to go?" "That's not really your concern anymore," I said, closing the trunk with a decisive click. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house key, the same key I had carried for over a decade. I placed it in my father's hand and looked him in the eye. "Thank you for 28 years. I hope Emma's wedding is about everything you want it to be." I got into my car and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see my parents standing in the driveway, my mother clutching my father's arm. They looked smaller, somehow more fragile than they had just an hour ago. As I drove away from the house where I had grown up, where I had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I had built countless snowmen in the front yard, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I wasn't worried about disappointing them. I wasn't walking on eggshells trying to avoid becoming the family's scapegoat for whatever went wrong next. The finality of that moment settled over me like a warm blanket. I had closed the door on that chapter of my life, like a final punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very complicated sentence. The next morning, I woke up in a budget motel room off Interstate 40, surrounded by everything I owned. The previous night felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. But my phone had 17 missed calls from my mother and 12 text messages that progressed from confused to angry to pleading. My first stop was Second National Bank, where I had done my banking since college. I needed to open a new individual checking account and remove myself from the joint account I shared with my parents. What I discovered there changed everything. "Mr. Thompson," said Mrs. Garcia, the bank manager who had helped me set up my first student account 8 years ago, "I need to show you something important about your accounts." She pulled up my financial records on her computer screen, and my stomach dropped. The family home mortgage, the one my parents had been paying for the last 15 years, was listed with me as the primary borrower. "I don't understand," I said, staring at the screen. "I was 21 when I co-signed that paperwork. I thought I was just helping with their refinancing." Mrs. Garcia nodded sympathetically. "The original mortgage was in your parents' names, but when they refinanced 7 years ago during the housing market, your credit score and income were used to secure better terms. According to our records, you're financially responsible for this loan." The monthly payment was $2,300. I had been automatically contributing exactly that amount to the joint checking account every month, assuming it was just my fair share of household expenses while I lived at home. "There's more," Mrs. Garcia continued, clicking to another screen. "The property at Downtown Riverside Apartments Unit 4B, that's titled solely in your name." I remembered that apartment. It was a small one-bedroom place that my grandfather had helped me buy when I was 23, using the inheritance money he had left me. At the time, my parents suggested Emma could use it as a photography studio since she was pursuing her artistic dreams. I had agreed, thinking it was temporary. "Emma's been living there for 3 years. I said, more to myself than to Mrs. Garcia. "The property taxes and maintenance fees have been coming out of your joint account as well," she explained. "About $800 monthly." I sat back in the uncomfortable bank chair trying to process what this meant. For years, I had been unknowingly paying my parents' mortgage and providing my sister with free housing, while they treated me like a financial burden on the family. "Mrs. Garcia, I need to freeze the joint checking account immediately." She looked concerned. "Are you sure that's a significant decision? And there may be automatic payments set up." "I'm very sure." I thought about my mother's panicked text messages, suddenly understanding their urgency. "And I'll need documentation of all account activity for the past 5 years." 20 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a folder full of statements that told a story I had never known. Over the past 5 years, my parents had withdrawn over $40,000 from our joint account for various expenses, all while lecturing me about financial responsibility. Emma's failed business ventures had been funded entirely by money I had earned. The photography equipment, the professional camera lenses, the studio lighting, the website, designed the marketing materials for Emma's 3 previous business attempts. I had paid for all of it without realizing. My phone buzzed with another call from my mother. This time, I answered. "Rudy, thank goodness," she said, her voice tight with panic. "There's been some kind of mistake with the bank account. Our mortgage payment was declined this morning and the automatic transfers for Emma's apartment fees aren't going through." "That's not a mistake?" I said calmly, sitting in my car in the bank parking lot. "I froze the account." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. "You can't do that," she finally said. "That money is for family expenses." "Family expenses," I repeated. "Like the $15,000 you spent on Emma's wedding photographer, or the $8,000 for her dress and alterations, or the $22,000 you've given her for various business investments over the past 3 years. How do you—" She began, then stopped. "Rudy, you're part of this family. That money benefits all of us. According to you yesterday, I'm not part of this family anymore. Remember," I could hear my father talking in the background, his voice agitated. "Your father wants to know what you've done about the house," my mother said. "I haven't done anything about the house yet, but it's interesting that you mention it because I just found out the mortgage is in my name." Another long silence. "We can explain that," my mother said quickly. "When we refinanced, your credit helped us get better terms. It was supposed to benefit everyone. Everyone except me, apparently, since I was never told I was the primary borrower on a $400,000 loan." "Rudy, please." My mother's voice cracked slightly. "Emma's wedding is in 12 days. We can't deal with financial problems right now." "You're right," I said. "You can't deal with financial problems right now, but I can, and I will." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make financial decisions based on what was best for me, not what was convenient for everyone else. My next stop was to see a lawyer. 3 days later, I was settling into a temporary furnished apartment across town when someone knocked on my door at 8:30 in the evening. I had given my address only to my coworker Jake, who had helped me move my computer equipment. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing in the hallway, mascara streaked down her cheeks. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "How did you find me?" "Jake told me where you were," she said, wiping her nose with a tissue. "Rudy, we need to talk." Emma looked different than she had at Christmas. Thinner, more anxious. Her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing an expensive designer sweater I didn't recognize, and carrying a purse that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I said. "Mom and Dad made it pretty clear where everyone stands." "That's just it," Emma said, pushing past me into the apartment. "They didn't mean it. They were just stressed about the wedding, and you know how they get when they're overwhelmed." I closed the door and watched as my sister paced around my small living room, her nervous energy filling the space. "Emma, they told me the greatest gift I could give you was to disappear forever." Those weren't words spoken in stress. That was how they really feel. She whirled around to face me, and I saw desperation in her eyes that I had never seen before. "You don't understand what you've done," she said, her voice rising. "The frozen account, the mortgage issues, the apartment situation. Brandon's family is asking questions about our finances, and I can't give them answers." Brandon was her fiancé, a successful lawyer from a wealthy Connecticut family. I had met him twice at family dinners, where he seemed pleasant, but distant, like someone going through the motions of getting to know his future in-laws. "What kind of questions?" I asked. Emma sank onto my couch and put her face in her hands. "His parents wanted to do a background check before the wedding. It's standard for their family given Brandon's career and their social standing. But when they started looking into our family's financial situation," she trailed off, and I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Emma, what did they find?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "They found the credit card accounts." "What credit card accounts?" "The ones in your name." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Rudy, I needed money for the wedding preparations for my photography equipment for general living expenses. Mom and Dad said it would be fine to use your credit, since you were family and you had such good credit. The room seemed to tilt sideways. You've been using credit cards in my name. It was supposed to be temporary, she said quickly. Just until my photography business started bringing in regular income, I was going to pay everything back. How much, Emma? She was crying again now, mascara making dark trails down her cheeks. About $37,000 across 4 different cards. I sat down heavily in my desk chair trying to process what she was telling me. My sister had committed identity theft. My parents had helped her do it. And I had been completely unaware. That's not all, Emma continued, her voice shaking. Brandon found out about the apartment downtown, the one that's in your name. I've been telling him that I owned it, that it was part of my business assets. You've been lying to your fiancé about your financial situation. I had to, she exploded, standing up and pacing again. Do you know what his family is like? They have money that goes back generations. His mother has a trust fund that could buy this entire apartment complex. I couldn't tell them that I'm basically broke and living off my brother's credit cards. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing by the minute. So this wedding is the only thing standing between me and complete financial ruin, Emma finished. If Brandon finds out about the debt, about the lies about the fact that our family is basically held together by your income, he'll call off the wedding. And if he calls off the wedding, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Emma had built her entire life around marrying Brandon and joining his wealthy family. Without that safety net, she would be facing bankruptcy fraud charges and social humiliation. You have to help me, she said, grabbing my hands. You have to unfreeze the account and let things go back to normal until after the wedding. Just give me 2 more weeks to get married, and then we can figure everything else out. I pulled my hands away from hers. Emma, what you've done is fraud. Identity theft. Using someone else's credit without permission is a federal crime. But you're my brother, she cried. Family doesn't press charges against family. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I barely recognized. The Emma I had grown up with had been spoiled and self-centered, but I had never thought she was capable of something like this. How long have Mom and Dad known about the credit cards? I asked. Emma's silence told me everything I needed to know. They've known all along, I said. This is why they wanted me to disappear before your wedding. They were afraid I'd find out. Rudy, please, Emma begged. I know I made mistakes, but I can fix this. Once I'm married to Brandon, his family will help me get back on my feet financially. I just need a little more time. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. You need to leave now. You can't be serious, she said, not moving from the couch. I'm your sister. This is my wedding we're talking about. You're right, I said. You are my sister, and that makes what you've done even worse. Emma finally stood up, her face hardening with anger. If you don't help me, I'll tell everyone that you abandoned the family right before my wedding. I'll make sure every relative, every family friend, everyone we know understands that you chose to destroy our family out of pure selfishness. Go ahead, I said. Tell them whatever you want, but tell them the truth too. Tell them about the credit cards, the identity theft, the lies you've been telling Brandon. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Rudy. When this all falls apart, you'll realize that you chose your pride over your family. After she left, I sat in the silence of my apartment and realized that the family I had been trying so hard to please, to support, to stay connected to had been systematically stealing from me for years. And they had convinced themselves that I was the selfish one. The next morning, I called a lawyer. 2 days before Emma's wedding, I was sitting in my apartment reviewing legal documents when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was familiar, but unexpected. Rudy, this is Ms. Henderson from next door to your parents' house. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from the phone book at the library. Ms. Henderson was 73 years old and had lived next door to my family since I was 10 years old. She was the kind of neighbor who brought cookies during holidays and kept an eye on everyone's houses when they went on vacation. Mrs. Henderson, it's good to hear from you. Is everything okay? Well, that's what I'm calling about, dear. I've been watching what's been going on over there the past few days, and I think there are some things you should know. I set down my legal papers and focused entirely on the conversation. What kind of things? First off, I want you to know that I've never believed the stories your parents have been telling about you around the neighborhood. I've watched you grow up, and I know what kind of young man you are. What stories have they been telling? Mrs. Henderson sighed deeply. Oh, honey, they've been painting quite a picture. According to them, you're financially irresponsible and have been bleeding the family dry for years. They've told people that you've been living at home because you can't manage money and that they've been supporting you out of parental duty. I felt my jaw clench. That's interesting considering I've been paying their mortgage for 7 years. I figured it was something like that, she said. See, I pay attention to things. I noticed that you drove the oldest car in the family, that you never seemed to buy new clothes, that you worked longer hours than anyone else I know. It never added up with their version of events. Mrs. Henderson paused, and I heard papers rustling in the background. There's more, Rudy, much more. I've been documenting things for a while now because something felt wrong about how they talked about you. Documenting things. I'm old, dear, but I'm not blind or deaf. Over the years, I've overheard conversations, seen financial documents in their trash, witnessed things that made me uncomfortable. She went on to explain that my parents had been systematically taking credit for my achievements while portraying themselves as long-suffering victims of my supposed failures. When I received my college scholarship, they told neighbors they had to supplement it significantly because I wasn't smart enough to earn a full ride. When I got promoted at my job, they claimed they had pulled strings through family connections. But the worst part, Mrs. Henderson continued, is what I overheard last week. My heart began racing. Your father was on the phone in the backyard talking to someone about the wedding plans. He said, and I quote, "Once Emma gets married and settles down with Brandon's family, we won't need to worry about Rudy anymore. The house will be secure, Emma will be taken care of, and we can finally cut ties without losing our financial stability." The words hit me like a physical blow. They had been planning to dispose of me all along. Mrs. Henderson, are you sure that's what he said? Honey, I wrote it down immediately. I also took pictures. Pictures? What kind of pictures? Well, I was concerned about identity theft in the neighborhood, so I started photographing any financial documents I saw in people's trash. Your parents throw away a lot of paperwork without shredding it properly. Ms. Henderson had unknowingly been documenting my parents' financial fraud for months. She had photographs of credit card statements in my name bank documents showing transfers from my accounts and even handwritten notes discussing how to manage the Rudy situation after Emma's wedding. I have something else that might interest you, she said. Mail. Mail? For the past 3 years, I've seen your mailman deliver large envelopes from law offices and banks to your parents' house addressed to you, official-looking things. But I never saw them give you any mail, which struck me as odd since you lived there. My grandfather's estate. I suddenly remembered that Grandpa Joe had mentioned other inheritances besides the money I used for the downtown apartment. There had been stock investments, some savings accounts, maybe even a life insurance policy. Mrs. Henderson, do you still have any of this documentation? Every bit of it, dear. I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew something wasn't right. I was hoping someday I'd have a chance to talk to you directly. Would you be willing to share this information with my lawyer? Absolutely. In fact, I think you should know that your parents have been meeting with some kind of financial advisor this week. I saw a man in an expensive suit coming and going several times. Yesterday, I heard your father on the phone talking about protecting assets and limiting liability. They were trying to hide money and property before the legal consequences of Emma's fraud caught up with them. There's one more thing, Rudy, the wedding. What about it? Your parents have been telling people that you chose not to attend because you were jealous of Emma's success. They're spinning this as your decision, not theirs. Mrs. Henderson had witnessed my parents rewriting history in real time, transforming their cruelty into my supposed character flaws. I want you to know that several neighbors have asked me about you, she continued. People who actually know you and have watched you help your family over the years. Not everyone believes their version of events. After I hung up with Mrs. Henderson, I immediately called my lawyer and arranged for her to meet with him the next day. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies, people who had seen through my parents' manipulation and were willing to stand up for the truth. But more importantly, I realized that my parents' cruelty wasn't spontaneous or emotionally driven. It was calculated, planned, and designed to eliminate me from their lives once I was no longer financially useful to them. Emma's wedding was tomorrow, and I was going to make sure it was a day my family would never forget. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. the kind of crisp October day that Emma had always said would be perfect for an outdoor wedding ceremony. I woke up at 6 o'clock not from an alarm, but from adrenaline. Today was the day everything would come into the light. My lawyer, Sandra Martinez, met me at 7:30 at a coffee shop downtown. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in fraud and family financial disputes. Mrs. Henderson had spent 2 hours with her the previous afternoon providing documentation that even Sandra found shocking in its thoroughness. "I've been practicing law for 18 years, Sandra said, spreading photographs and documents across our corner table. "I've seen family financial abuse before, but rarely this systematic or well-documented." She showed me photocopies of credit card statements totaling $39,000 in fraudulent charges, bank transfer records showing unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, and even handwritten notes in my mother's handwriting detailing how to forge my signature for various financial documents. "The identity theft charges alone could result in federal prosecution," Sandra explained. "But combined with the mail fraud, the mortgage deception, and the inheritance theft, this becomes a much larger case." The inheritance theft was the most shocking discovery. My grandfather had left me approximately $120,000 in various accounts and investments, plus a life insurance policy worth $75,000. My parents had been intercepting and cashing these payments for 3 years, forging my signature and using the money to fund Emma's lifestyle and their own expenses. "What happens now?" I asked. "We serve papers during the wedding ceremony," Sandra said matter-of-factly. "Emma and your parents need to be formally notified of the legal proceedings, and serving them publicly will prevent them from claiming they never received the documents." "That seems harsh." Sandra looked at me with sympathy. "Rudy, your family has stolen nearly $200,000 from you over the past several years. They've committed multiple felonies and shown no remorse. The time for gentle approaches has passed." At 10:30, I put on my best suit and drove to St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where Emma's wedding was scheduled to begin at noon. Sandra followed in her own car, accompanied by a professional process server named David Chen. The church parking lot was filling up with expensive cars. I recognized several of them as belonging to Brandon's family members, wealthy Connecticut socialites, who probably had no idea they were about to witness a financial crime drama unfold. Inside the church, I took a seat in the back row, far from the family section where my parents were greeting guests and playing the role of proud parents. Emma was nowhere to be seen, presumably getting ready in one of the church's preparation rooms. My mother caught sight of me and froze. She whispered something to my father, who turned around and stared at me with undisguised anger. They clearly hadn't expected me to attend, given their public narrative that I had chosen to skip my sister's wedding out of jealousy. At 11:45, the church doors opened and Sandra walked in, followed by David, the process server. They moved purposefully down the aisle, drawing curious stares from wedding guests who had never seen legal proceedings interrupt a social event. The ceremony began exactly at noon. Emma looked beautiful in her white gown, walking down the aisle on my father's arm while a string quartet played traditional wedding music. Brandon stood at the altar looking nervous but happy, surrounded by his groomsmen and family members. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with traditional words about love, commitment, and the joining of two families. I almost felt guilty about what was going to happen next. But then I remembered my mother's words. "The greatest gift you could give your sister for her wedding is if you would just disappear from our family forever." When Pastor Williams asked if anyone objected to the union, Sandra stood up. "Your Honor," she said in a clear, carrying voice, "I'm Sandra Martinez, representing Rudy Thompson in several legal matters involving financial fraud. I need to serve papers to the bride and both parents of the bride." The church fell completely silent. Emma's face went white under her makeup. My parents looked like they were about to be sick. David moved efficiently through the church, handing legal documents to Emma, my mother, and my father. The wedding guests murmured in confusion and alarm. "What is this about?" Brandon asked, still standing at the altar. Sandra addressed the entire church. "The bride and her parents are being formally notified of legal proceedings related to identity theft, mail fraud, and financial elder abuse, totaling approximately $200,000. Emma dropped her bouquet. Several wedding guests gasped audibly. These proceedings involve credit cards opened fraudulently in Mayor Rudy Thompson's name, unauthorized access to his financial accounts, and the theft of inheritance money left to him by his deceased grandfather. Brandon's father, a distinguished man in his 60s, stepped forward. Are you saying this wedding is connected to financial crimes? The bride has acknowledged using credit cards in her brother's name without permission to fund wedding expenses and personal lifestyle costs, Sandra replied. The total fraudulent debt is $39,000. Brandon turned to Emma, his face a mixture of shock and betrayal. Emma, is this true? Emma tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked desperately at my parents, but they were staring at the legal documents in their hands. The wedding gifts, the venue deposits, the honeymoon reservations. Brandon continued, his voice growing louder. How much of this was paid for with stolen money? Brandon, please. Emma finally managed to say, I can explain everything. But Brandon was already removing his wedding ring. I can't marry someone who's committed felonies to fund our wedding. My legal career, my family's reputation, everything would be at risk. He handed the ring to Pastor Williams and walked out of the church, followed immediately by his entire family and most of the wedding guests. Within 10 minutes, the church was nearly empty, except for Emma, my parents, Sandra, and me. Emma collapsed onto the front pew, still in her wedding dress, sobbing uncontrollably. My mother rushed to comfort her while my father approached me with fury in his eyes. How could you do this to your own family? He demanded. I didn't do anything to my family, I replied calmly. My family did this to themselves. Sandra handed my father additional papers. Mayor Thompson, you'll also find that the mortgage on your house is now in default due to the frozen joint account. Since your son is the primary borrower, he has the legal right to demand immediate payment of the outstanding balance or initiate foreclosure proceedings. My father's face went from red to gray. Rudy, you can't be serious. You told me the greatest gift I could give this family was to disappear. I said, consider this my wedding gift to Emma. I'm disappearing from your financial obligations, your manipulation, and your lives. I walked out of the church, leaving my family to deal with the consequences of their choices for the first time in years. Over the following 2 weeks, the life my parents had built on lies and manipulation came crashing down like a house of cards in a windstorm. I watched from my apartment across town as phone calls, legal notices, and financial institutions demanded answers they couldn't provide. My mother called me 17 times in the first 3 days after the wedding, her messages progressing from angry to desperate to pleading. She left voicemails explaining that I was destroying the family and that they would never recover from this humiliation. But she never once apologized for the theft or acknowledged what they had done wrong. Emma's situation deteriorated rapidly. Brandon not only called off their marriage, but also reported the identity theft to his family's legal team, who advised him to distance himself completely from any potential financial crimes. The wedding vendors demanded immediate payment for their services, and when Emma couldn't provide it, several of them filed liens against the downtown apartment that she had been using as collateral. My parents were forced to put their house on the market within a week. The mortgage payments, which I had been unknowingly covering for 7 years, were over 2 months behind even before I froze the joint account. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings, and my parents' desperate attempts to refinance failed when lenders discovered the fraud investigation. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source: my co-workers and friends. Jake from my office had been quietly spreading the word about what happened, and the response shocked me. Within days, I had phone calls and messages from people I hadn't heard from in months, all expressing support and outrage over my family's treatment of me. Sarah from my college programming class called to tell me she had never forgotten how I helped her with her senior project, working with her for 3 straight weekends without asking for anything in return. I always wondered why you seemed so stressed about money in college, she said. Now I understand you were basically supporting your entire family. My former boss, Mer Patterson, reached out to offer a reference letter for any legal proceedings. I remember when your grandfather died, he said. You told me you wouldn't be able to take time off for the funeral because of family financial obligations. I thought it was admirable at the time, but now I realize your parents were probably pressuring you to keep working so you could keep funding their lifestyle. Even my high school guidance counselor, Ms. Roberts, contacted me after hearing about the situation through the local community network. "Rudy, I still have your college scholarship application essays," she said. "You wrote about wanting to lift up your family and create financial security for everyone you love. I kept them because they were so heartfelt. But I never imagined your family would take advantage of that generosity." The documentation from Ms. Henderson proved invaluable in legal proceedings. Her photographs and records provided a clear timeline of the financial abuse, and her willingness to testify gave my case credibility that would have been hard to establish otherwise. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to control the narrative in their social circle were falling apart. Other neighbors came forward with their own observations about the family dynamics, and several people admitted they had always found it strange that the financially irresponsible son drove the oldest car and never seemed to spend money on himself. The revelation about my grandfather's stolen inheritance was particularly damaging to my parents' reputation. Grandpa Joe had been well respected in the community, and the idea that Harold and Patricia had been stealing from his bequest to me struck people as especially despicable. Emma's photography business, which had been struggling even before the wedding disaster, collapsed entirely when her few remaining clients learned about the fraud charges. Her professional equipment was repossessed by creditors, and she was forced to move back in with my parents in their increasingly precarious housing situation. 2 weeks after the wedding, I received a call from Sandra with an update on the legal proceedings. "The prosecutor's office is moving forward with charges," she said. "Your parents and sister are facing significant fines and possible jail time depending on how they choose to handle restitution." What does that mean for me? It means you have some decisions to make about how you want to resolve this. You could pursue maximum penalties, or you could consider a restitution agreement that focuses on recovering your stolen money rather than punishment. That evening, I sat in my apartment thinking about the past month. For 28 years, I had defined myself through my relationship to my family. I was the responsible son, the supportive brother, the one who sacrificed his own needs for everyone else's benefit. I had believed that love meant accepting mistreatment and that loyalty required endless forgiveness. But I was learning that real love doesn't require you to disappear or diminish yourself. Real family doesn't steal from each other and then blame the victim for being selfish. Real relationships are built on mutual respect and honesty, not manipulation and financial exploitation. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mother. "Rudy," she said, her voice small and defeated. "We need to talk." For the first time in weeks, she wasn't making demands or offering excuses. She was asking. "I'm listening," I said. "We're going to lose the house. Emma is facing criminal charges. Your father's blood pressure is so high the doctor is worried about a heart attack." She paused. "We can't fix this without your help." "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" "We need you to consider a settlement agreement instead of criminal prosecution. We'll pay back everything we took, we'll get family counseling, we'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the years of manipulation, the stolen money, the casual cruelty of telling me to disappear from their lives. "Mom, there's something I need to know first. Do you understand what you did wrong?" Another pause. Then, for the first time in my adult life, my mother admitted fault without making excuses. "We stole from you. We lied to you. We took your love and generosity and turned it against you." Her voice was shaking. "We convinced ourselves that you owed us your success because we raised you, but the truth is we became dependent on you and started resenting you for it." It wasn't everything I needed to hear, but it was a start. "I'll consider a settlement," I said. "But it comes with conditions that aren't negotiable." "Anything?" "First, full restitution of all stolen money, plus interest. Second, you sell the house and downsize to something you can actually afford. Third, Emma gets a real job and pays back the credit card debt through monthly payments. Fourth, we all attend family therapy until a professional says we've addressed these issues. And fifth, if anyone violates the agreement or lies to me again, I pursue criminal charges with no further discussion." "Those terms seem fair," my mother said quietly. "They're not fair, Mom. They're generous. Fair would be letting you face the full legal consequences of committing multiple felonies against your own son." After I hung up, I realized something had fundamentally changed in our family dynamic. For the first time in my adult life, I held the power in our relationships. They needed me more than I needed them. And while that reversal felt strange and uncomfortable, it also felt like justice. 6 months later, I was sitting in Dr. Rebecca Walsh's office for what would be our final family therapy session. The small room had become familiar over the past 24 weeks, a neutral space where we had slowly, painfully worked through decades of dysfunction and financial abuse. My parents sat across from me looking older and more fragile than they had a year ago. The stress of legal proceedings, financial ruin, and social humiliation had aged them both considerably. But more importantly, they looked different in other ways. Less entitled, more thoughtful, almost humble. Emma sat between them wearing scrubs from her new job as a medical receptionist at a family practice across town. She had been working 45 hours a week for 5 months, paying down her debt and rebuilding her life one paycheck at a time. The change in her was the most dramatic of all. Gone was the entitled princess who had expected others to fund her dreams. In her place was someone who seemed to be learning the value of earning her own way. "Rudy," Dr. Walsh said, looking at her notes from our sessions, "when we started this process, you told me you felt like you had lost your family. How do you feel about that now?" I thought about the question carefully. I think I'm learning the difference between losing a family and finding a healthier way to be part of one. My father cleared his throat. "I want to say something if that's okay." Dr. Walsh nodded encouragingly. "Rudy, for years I told myself that we weren't taking advantage of you because you were benefiting too. You had a place to live, you were part of a family, you had people who cared about you." He paused and looked directly at me. "But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that if you realized how much we depended on your income, you would leave. And instead of dealing with that fear honestly, I convinced myself that you owed us your success." It was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. "I don't expect you to forgive us immediately," he continued, "but I want you to know that I understand now. We didn't love you the way a family should love. We loved what you could do for us." My mother reached over and took my hand gently. "I keep thinking about that day in the kitchen when we told you to disappear. I keep wondering what kind of people we had become that we could say something so cruel to our own son." Emma spoke up for the first time that session. "I want to tell you about my job." I looked at her with surprise. Emma had rarely volunteered information about her work, seeming almost embarrassed by the dramatic change in her lifestyle. "It's the first time in my adult life that I've earned my own money," she said. "Really earned it by showing up every day and doing work that helps other people. And it's the first time I felt proud of myself for something that didn't involve spending money or impressing other people." She took a shaky breath. "I was so angry at you for destroying my wedding, but the truth is you saved me from building my entire life on a lie. Brandon deserved better than someone who would commit crimes to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford." Dr. Walsh made a note and looked around the room. "It sounds like everyone has gained some important insights over these past months. Rudy, what do you want your relationship with your family to look like moving forward?" "I want us to be honest with each other," I said. I want relationships based on who we actually are, not who we think we're supposed to be. And I want everyone to be responsible for their own choices and their own lives." The settlement agreement had been finalized 3 months earlier. My parents sold their house and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment that they could afford on my father's income. They were paying me back for the stolen inheritance in monthly installments that would take them 4 years to complete, but they had never missed a payment. Emma had moved into her own small studio apartment and was gradually paying down the credit card debt through automatic payments from her paychecks. She had also started attending community college part-time, studying business administration with a focus on healthcare management. Most surprisingly, I was building a new life that felt completely different from anything I had experienced before. Without the constant stress of managing my family's financial emergencies and emotional manipulation, I had energy for things I had never prioritized: hobbies, friendships, even dating. 3 months ago, I had met Sarah Chen at a hiking group organized through my company's recreation committee. She was a veterinarian who shared my love of outdoor activities and had a refreshing directness that reminded me of Mrs. Henderson. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, rather than need or obligation. Before we finish today, Dr. Walsh said, I want each of you to share one thing you're grateful for about how this experience has changed your family. My mother went first. I'm grateful that we're talking to each other honestly for the first time in years. My father nodded. I'm grateful that Rudy didn't give up on us completely, even though we gave him every reason to. Emma looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm grateful that you loved me enough to stop enabling my worst behavior. When it was my turn, I thought about everything that had happened since that day in the kitchen when they told me to disappear. I'm grateful that I learned the difference between being loved and being useful, I said. And I'm grateful that we all found out it's never too late to start treating each other like family instead of like resources. Dr. Walsh smiled and closed her notebook. I think you're ready to continue this work on your own. As we left the therapist's office together, my mother asked if I wanted to join them for lunch. It was a simple invitation, the kind of normal family interaction that we were slowly learning to have without hidden agendas or financial complications. I'd like that, I said, over lunch at a modest restaurant that my parents could actually afford. We talked about ordinary things, Emma's classes, my father's work projects, my mother's new part-time job at a local real estate office. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was having a conversation with family members, rather than managing a crisis or being managed by one. When we parted ways in the parking lot, Emma hugged me goodbye. I know I have no right to ask this, she said, but would you consider being in my life as we all figure out how to be better people? I'm already in your life, Emma, I replied. The difference is that now I'm here because I choose to be, not because I'm afraid of what will happen if I leave. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking through photo albums Mrs. Henderson had given me. She had been collecting pictures of me throughout my childhood and teenage years, images that my parents had never bothered to preserve. In the photos, I could see a pattern I had never noticed before in every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every milestone event. I was either helping with preparations or cleaning up afterward. I was always working to make everyone else's experience better, rarely just enjoying the moment myself. But there was one recent photo that Mrs. Henderson had taken without my knowledge. It showed me in my new apartment laughing during a video call with Sarah while cooking dinner for myself. In that picture, I looked relaxed and genuinely happy in a way I had never seen in any family photo. I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the restoration of old patterns, but the creation of new ones. Not the return to who I used to be, but the discovery of who I actually was underneath years of manipulation and obligation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. How did therapy go today? Really well, I typed back. I think we're finally learning how to be a family, instead of just people who happen to be related. That sounds like progress. Want to celebrate with dinner this weekend? I'd love that. As I set down my phone, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. I had a job I enjoyed, relationships built on mutual respect, financial security that belonged entirely to me, and a family that was slowly learning to love without conditions or hidden costs. The greatest gift I had ever given myself wasn't disappearing from my family's life. It was refusing to disappear from my own. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who have lost their way is to stop enabling their worst behavior. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is set boundaries that protect everyone involved from the cycle of manipulation and resentment. And sometimes the wisest thing you can do is walk away from relationships that require you to become smaller, weaker, or less than who you really are. I had spent most of my adult life believing that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant silence, and that family meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give me. But I learned that real love requires honesty, true loyalty, demands accountability, and healthy family relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. The road to healing hadn't been easy for any of us. My parents had faced financial ruin, social humiliation, and the reality of their own behavior. Emma had lost her dream wedding, her fake lifestyle, and her sense of entitlement to other people's resources. I had lost the illusion of family harmony and the comfortable role of being needed. But what we gained was infinitely more valuable. We gained the possibility of real relationships based on truth, instead of manipulation, respect instead of exploitation, and love instead of obligation. Looking back now, I understand that my parents' cruelest words actually contained an accidental gift when they told me the greatest gift I could give Emma's wedding would be to disappear from their family forever. They forced me to discover something I had never known: I was valuable enough to choose my own life, strong enough to stand on my own, and worthy of relationships where my presence was wanted rather than just useful. The family I have now isn't perfect, but it's honest. We're learning together, growing together, and building something new from the wreckage of what we used to be. And for the first time in my life, I know that I belong in my own family. Not because they need me, but because they want me. That makes all the difference in the world. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and protecting your own well-being? How did you handle the difficult balance between loyalty and self-respect? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming difficult family situations and finding the strength to build healthier relationships. Thank you for listening. And remember that you deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide for others. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.